Hey everyone, and welcome to RPG Horror Stories with DnD Doge. In today's video, we have a story about a player that takes mostly innocent intra-party conflicts to murder hobo levels. But before we get into the story, let's meditate with Simba to help give us some fortitude against the cringe that this story is sure to induce. There we go. But with that done, let's get into this D&D horror story. And strap in, it's a bit of a longer one. Player tries to force a rivalry with my goblin, going as far as to lie about his backstory. By Reddit user, Emotional Memory 3230. Hello, this story is a couple of years old, but I figured I'd tell it because I do find it amusing that this player tried so hard to create quote, dramatic roleplay moments. I was part of a D&D group with several of my friends. We had the mindset of, it's what our characters would do, but with limitations. If your character's actions infringed upon the fun of another player, this was frowned upon, so it was completely possible in our group to make a character that didn't work with everyone, and have characters whose morals conflicted, causing moments of in-game arguments. If you wanted to create a character as your rival or enemy, the other player had to be included with this. They needed to know about your plans and agree to it. The Dungeon Master stated that it had to make sense story-wise, which meant that something had to happen in-game between you and the other character, or it had to make sense in your backstory. A new player had joined our ranks. We'll call him Clovis, not his real name. He was new to Dungeons & Dragons, and we helped explain the rules to him. During his free time, he watched videos and did some research of his own. Probably the first red flag was that this new player didn't seem to like the way I had built my goblin, Bibbidi. I had made her a reverse rogue. Instead of stealing from others, she would sneak things into people's bags that she thought were gifts. Rocks, sticks, buttons, paper drawings, that one really shiny statue she nabbed from a dungeon's chest. It wasn't uncommon for people to receive random items that they'd later have to clear out to keep themselves from being over-encumbered, and to keep someone from randomly having 50 rocks suddenly appear in their bag. I would let the player know out of character what I had done, so things didn't pile up. Most of the characters didn't mind, usually emptying out the items that weren't worth anything during long rests. But every so often, Bibbidi would find useful items to gift onto the party, whether it be a quest item, or something as simple as more arrows for the ranger. Clovis had come in with a Hexblade Warlock Paladin, which is probably one of the strongest builds in the game. I had thought nothing about it at the time, since I figured maybe he was someone who enjoyed combat more. Our group met his character, and began traveling together. All seemed fine as we traveled along the road, and Bibbidi, as she does with every new member, decided that he needed a gift. At this point, Barbarian had managed to explain to Bibbidi that rocks and twigs held no value to a person. So while everyone introduced themselves around a campfire, I had Bibbidi search the forest and managed to find what I was looking for. An item that would help and have at least some kind of value. A bright red apple. The Dungeon Master messaged me, saying that this could count as a ration. So I had my goblin nab it, rushing back and sneaking up behind Clovis. As I went to slide it into his bag, I rolled like a 2 on my sleight of hand, and Clovis heard the light rustling noises of his bag being opened. He turned to look, and the Dungeon Master described Bibbidi opening up his bag and dropping the apple inside. Now, Clovis might have took this as Bibbidi stealing his things, or maybe thought she was using his bag as a trash can. But suddenly, he grabbed his sword, swinging it at her, while also casting Smite on the weapon. Now, this alone almost completely knocked my goblin down, as she quickly scampered away. In character, he began yelling about Bibbidi going through his bag, and Barbarian quickly stepped in as he started trying to smooth the situation over. Barbarian explained to him that Bibbidi had a habit of sneaking stuff into people's bags, but assured him that she never took anything. To be safe, Clovis checked his inventory before having his character glare at mine while the bard healed her. This wasn't out of the ordinary. Like I said, our group loves different dynamics in the party. The problems began after this interaction. Out of game, Clovis looked at my roll on D&D Beyond and said, "Hey, wait a minute, you rolled a 2, but your total score was a 10? You have a +8 to your rolls?" I explained to Clovis that Bibbidi had a +8 due to her having expertise. At first, Clovis thought Bibbidi was also a bard, but I told him that she was a rogue. Clovis began laughing, saying that, "Why would you make a goblin a rogue? They can already use the rogue's ability to disengage and hide as a bonus action. It's such a waste." I told Clovis that this also gave her the ability to dash as a bonus action, and plus, I built Bibbidi mostly for roleplay. I guess because of this, Clovis assumed that just because Bibbidi was made for RP, this meant that she was useless in combat. And from the next session until him being kicked, Bibbidi became his punching bag. He also made several comments about my goblin being dumb after finding out from Bard that she had once snuck a diamond that she had found into her bag. It started off small, so small, in fact, that I didn't realize how far Clovis was willing to take this. He had decided, without talking to me, that there would be a rivalry between his paladin warlock and my rogue. He would talk down to her, acting as if she was some brainless savage. I played into this, since Bibbidi's dump stat was her intelligence, but also because I thought that maybe Clovis's character was biased against monster races. It would make sense, he was a paladin after all, but it started getting worse, as Clovis did everything to try and provoke her into fighting him, like purposefully knocking over her drink during lunch at a tavern, taking stuff from her and holding them out of her reach, teasing her about her height, and commenting about how she looked like a dancing monkey. During one combat, after killing some wolves, Clovis had done some rolls in secret and approached Bibbidi, saying that he had a surprise for her. He told her to close her eyes, and Bibbidi did so, excitedly holding out her hands. The next thing I know, he's smearing wolf guts on her face. Shocked and horrified, Bibbidi recoiled in absolute horror, but Clovis laughed as if it was the funniest thing ever. Of course, Barbarian stepped in, threatening Clovis that if he ever did anything disgusting like that again, that he would chop his head off. Clovis replied with, "Come on, I was just trying to feed the little monster. They eat this kind of stuff all the time." This was the first time that I felt off about our interactions, and I started paying more attention. This didn't feel like the usual character interactions that I had with people. This just felt downright mean and cruel. Fast forward a few sessions, and Bibbidi hadn't really engaged aggressively towards Clovis, mostly because she wasn't that type of character, and she also didn't want to prove his comments about her being a savage correct. Part of me was hoping that if I did not engage, Clovis would take the hint that I wasn't enjoying these interactions. I think because of this, he thought that in order to get the reaction out of her that he was wanting, he would have to do something extreme. Eventually, our characters are having to cross a bridge. It's mostly broken away, and the group decided that since my character had the best dexterity and was lighter than the others, they would send her across. There was a tree on the other side that the Dungeon Master described as being large, and looking as if it was about to fall over due to the wood at the base rotting. The plan was for my goblin to go across the bridge, and use a small hand axe provided by the barbarian to chop down the tree, using it as a makeshift bridge to get across safely. During this time, Clovis didn't say much, but as my character started making her way across the bridge, the Dungeon Master suddenly halted the game, saying that, "No, if you want to do that, you're not rolling that in secret. You're going to say out loud what you're doing." Clovis argued that he was afraid that the characters would metagame, but the Dungeon Master did not relent. Clovis then started explaining what he was doing behind their backs in a half-laughing tone, almost as if he was trying to downplay the situation. "Okay, so I'm using my sword to stealthily slice at the rope of the bridge," Clovis laughed. "What?" Bart exclaimed. "Why would you do that? Bibbidi is still on the bridge." "Yeah, I know, "That's why he's doing it," Clovis explained. "I don't know if you guys have noticed, but my character hates goblins." This was said with such condescension, as if we were idiots for not understanding why he would do something like this. I could almost hear the Dungeon Master quirk an eyebrow as he asked why. "It's part of his backstory. His village was raided by goblins," Clovis said. "Orcs," the Dungeon Master corrected. "In your backstory, you wrote orcs." Cue a nearly 30-minute argument between the Dungeon Master and Clovis as they debated his backstory, causing the Dungeon Master to look at the file Clovis had shared with him and highlighted the area that said orcs. But Clovis still tried to justify it with a last-minute change, saying that he had met goblins and had just gotten the two races confused. The Dungeon Master told him that if he did this, if he really wanted to go through with possibly killing another character, then it would have consequences. He suggested that Clovis retcon what he's doing, or if he really wanted to insist on doing this, play it in a way that's not going to kill my character, because this behavior would be frowned upon. Clovis still maintained that he wanted to do it, so the Dungeon Master said so be it. The Dungeon Master had me roll a dex save as the bridge started collapsing from one side. I had rolled an 11 total, and was sure that I failed, but the Dungeon Master described my character's hand slipping from the rope, but described my character flailing around so much that one of the ropes actually managed to tangle around her leg. As I climbed to the top, I had noticed that the Dungeon Master didn't ask me to make any more dex saves, despite the fact that I had been doing so across the bridge. Dungeon Master then asked the rest of the party members to roll perception checks with advantage. Clovis asked, in an annoyed tone, why they were getting advantage, and Dungeon Master said, "You were standing right next to them doing this." And surprise, everyone in the party saw this, and Barbarian wasted no time in punching Clovis in the face. They started bickering back and forth, Clovis putting the blame on my character, saying that he knew she was stealing from him that night, and how all goblins are savages. Out of character, Bard assured him that I wasn't, but Clovis's response was, "Yeah, but my character doesn't know that." While this was going on, my goblin is chopping down the tree from the other side. And what does she see? She sees Clovis point his sword at Barbarian in a threatening manner. Probably a little late to mention this, but Barbarian and my rogue had a very close bond, kind of like Pike and Grog from Vox Machina, but with the occasional moments where the Barbarian would throw my goblin at enemies, let her make a hit using sneak attack, and then have her use her bonus action to disengage, run all the way back to Barbarian, use her next turn to hide, and then have Barbarian repeat the process all over again. Him constantly insulting her, making comments about her being a monster. It hurt, but she wouldn't dare act in fear of proving him right. But threatening Barbarian? This would not stand. I had Bibbidi drop the axe and take out her crossbow, getting as close to the edge of the cliff as possible before firing an arrow right into him. Because he wasn't paying attention to her, I got my sneak attack damage too. Clovis called my goblin a coward, turning all of his insults to her and trying to get her to come across to fight him one-on-one. Out of character, Clovis kept talking about how he had wanted them to have a rivalry for so long, how excited he was for this development, that all his characters saw that mine was good for was probably enough experience points for a level up, how this meek little rogue wouldn't stand a chance against his Hexblade Paladin due to how strong he had made them to be, but I don't think he understood my intentions at all. "This isn't a rivalry to my character," I finally told him. "You insult her, you smear stuff on her face, you treat her like a dog. To her, you're just a bad person, and Barbarians taught her what happens to bad people." I think at this point, it finally clicked in Clovis's mind what my goblin was planning on doing. He disengaged and tried to run away, managing to get 10 feet before he was aware I would have to roll with disadvantage. Barbarian chased after him, managing to land another swing on him and bring him down. I could hear how disinterested Clovis was at the way the events had turned out, as I had my goblin finish chopping down the tree and used it to get back to her teammates. While the rest discussed what to do in game, I had Bibbidi drag Clovis to the edge of the cliff and looked over it. It seemed like there was some sort of river below it, and an evil thought began to form in my mind. I had Bibbidi lean down, whispering to Clovis, "I have a present for you," and started filling his backpack with various rocks and pebbles that Bibbidi had in her collection before rolling them off the side of the cliff. His character hit the surface of the water, taking a failed death save from the impact, and then sank to the bottom and started drowning. Clovis started complaining, saying how unfair that was to do that to an unconscious character, since he had no way of preventing this. "You did have a way," the Dungeon Master told him, "by not doing what you did. I warned you there would be consequences. You attacked a fellow party member out of racist intents. Did you not think that the others wouldn't react?" Clovis started coming up with excuses, denying that it was racist, saying that his character had been hurt by goblins, and finally said, "You said this was an open table that encouraged character conflicts and scenarios." "It is," the Dungeon Master said, "but I told you it was within reason. The moment you start affecting how much fun someone else is having in the game, that's the moment you've gone too far." Clovis started trying to blame me, saying that I never said I wasn't having fun, but I finally said, "Well, tell me then, how much fun did you have when my rogue did what your paladin was planning to do?" "She wasn't unconscious," he argued. "She's a rogue. She could have made it to safety, and she did." "It doesn't matter. She still didn't see you doing it," I told him. And Dungeon Master said, "And I didn't have her make as many checks as she should have made to make sure their character didn't die. When she rolled that 11, by all rights, her character should have fell, but I took it easy on her. If you didn't have fun in that moment, why would you think OP would have?" To this, Clovis had no answer. He just kept defending his actions due to his character's hatred of goblins, and how he just wanted to have a fun rivalry. To which, Barbarian finally snapped and said, "Maybe it could have been fun if you didn't try to force it by being horrible to a player for no reason, other than you want them to hate each other." Dungeon Master told Clovis that if he wanted to do something like this, he needs to talk to the other players. He re-explains how, yes, we are very open to different character dynamics in this campaign, but when you do something, you need to ask yourself, if a player did this to me, would I like it? And judging by how upset he was, it was very obvious in that situation that the answer was no, he didn't like it. He told him that while our characters might not always get along, they still are able to work together, because the only way we can run a good game is if the group can work together as a unit, despite our differences. And if Clovis understands this, we'll continue and have his character wash up on a riverbed somewhere. Clovis agreed, and after our characters made it across, they started searching the river for Clovis's body. They managed to find him, soaking wet and unconscious. Barbarian suggests tying him up until he wakes up so that they can figure out what his problem is. And Clovis starts talking out of character about how he's excited for his paladin's new goal of getting revenge against Barbarian and my goblin. Bard then stops mid-conversation and says, "The Dungeon Master just told you that the party needs to be able to work together as a unit. How are we going to do that if you're actively trying to kill two members of the party?" There was silence for a moment before Clovis started trying to backpedal on what he said. But when that didn't work, he finally just said, "Well, you don't know what my character's trying to do. He'll be working in secret." The Dungeon Master let out a heavy sigh before Clovis was finally booted from the call and removed from the server. Dungeon Master said that he tried to message Clovis again to explain that he can't do things like that without the player's permission or talking it over. But Clovis just started ranting about how he lied about this being an open game, that everyone else got to have heated arguments and interactions, but when he tried to do it, everyone turned against him. I don't think he realized that our characters' fights never went past words. Yeah, a character might punch a character for 1 point of damage, but that was the most extreme it ever got. Clovis wanted to take the idea of party conflict and basically murder another character. I asked Dungeon Master if I could see a copy of Clovis's backstory, and sure enough, it mentions orcs about 6 times in that backstory. No mentions of goblins anywhere. Also, when I think about it now, with how insanely strong his build was, that quote rivalry probably would have been more like him using my goblin as his personal punching bag. I was surprised Clovis had this type of reaction. We had players come into our games before that have never misunderstood the rules that much, or go to that many lengths to force a specific reaction that they were wanting. Ironically, my goblin would end up having a rival, a little kobold named Craig. The two would argue about who was the best at finding shinies, and often show what they managed to hoard after a long day of traveling, or argue over items that they both swear that they saw first. And the two would end up getting into a fight, by each of them throwing their collection of shinies at each other, until Barbarian broke it up, grabbing the two munchkins and saying, "Are you two really fighting over who has the most effing rocks?" Well, first, I gotta say, Bibbidi sounds like a pretty interesting and adorable character that needs to be protected at all costs. The idea of a reverse rogue that just wants to give presents to her fellow friends and party members is a really entertaining concept. Now, having the party not always get along and get into arguments and such can really elevate the roleplay and story of the game. Having that dynamic and having the characters grow throughout it can give a campaign that little extra flavor that makes it more interesting. It just sounds like Clovis took this idea and went ham with it. Though, the moment when Clovis wiped the wolf guts onto Bibbidi's face, and OP started feeling like things were going too far, perhaps OP should have said something out of game about how that may have gone a little bit too far, and still have her character not retaliate. Like OP said, her not saying anything may have contributed to Clovis taking things to the next level in order to get the animosity between their characters to be a thing. I also gotta give props to the Dungeon Master here. When Clovis messaged him about what his plan was at the bridge, DM did make sure that it wouldn't happen in secret, and even gave Clovis a warning that there would be consequences. And after all of that went down, they all talked to Clovis about why that was a little bit too far, and it seemed like he understood, so the Dungeon Master allowed him to survive the fall and be found. But then Clovis just had to say that he would be plotting revenge, and that was the final nail that the banhammer struck. It is good to hear that Bibbidi did eventually get a rival, but a more wholesome one with the kobold, where they just competed to get the most shinies. And quite frankly, the idea of a goblin and a kobold throwing their rocks at each other is kind of adorable. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may your games remain horror story free. Until next time.